spring training right around the corner, but did you know that jet lag actually impairs the performance of players in the MLB? And that's according to a new study from Northwestern. A trip across 2 or 3 time zones can have some pretty significant effects. Joining us this morning to talk about this is Dr. Ravi Allada, who is the chair of the neurobiology department at Northwestern University and who conducted this study. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in. So you said you've been working on this study for about 4 years. You obviously had an inkling that this might play an issue. Why did you decide to look into this?
Well, my lab is interested in studying circadian or 24-hour clocks inside our bodies. And so this was an ideal question to look at in Major League Baseball and with jet lag. So that's what really motivated us to look at this in this way.
And what did you discover? Anything surprising right off the bat, but overall, what did you discover?
Well, what we found was that jet-lagged pitchers gave up more home runs. And this effect was large enough to essentially erase any home field advantage a pitcher might have.
Wow. So when you found this to be the case, as you were doing this study, I'm sure one of the things that you were trying to figure out is what can be done to make sure this doesn't have this effect.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things we know, at least baseball fans know, is that a starting pitcher will pitch a game, often have 4 or 5 days of rest. So what that means is that a pitcher could be sent out early to the destination where they're going to pitch their next game. That allows their internal clocks to adjust to the new time zone and hopefully mitigate the effects of jet lag.
That's very interesting, but you know, in some cases, you don't have a ton of time to go ahead of time, right?
That's true. Absolutely. Most of us don't. And so what you can do for yourself is you can try to make that, try to trick your body into making that adjustment before you get to your destination. So if you're going east, you might go to bed a little bit earlier, make sure you get sunlight earlier and earlier in the morning to kind of mimic what your environment will be once you get to your destination.
Okay, I love this. So you actually have an example from the 2016 National League Championship Series where this is pretty much the case. Describe what happened and tell us what you know.
Sure. So I should say as a caveat that, that we studied 45,000 games in our study, so it's hard to make a conclusion from one game. But
this is a good example.
But this is a good example that illustrates, I think, the conclusions of our research, and that is in Game 2 of the National League Championship Series, Clayton Kershaw of the Dodgers really shut down the Cubs, gave up 2 hits, shut them out literally. And then later on in the series, coming back from Los Angeles to Chicago in Game 6, the Cubs hit him pretty hard. They hit a couple of home runs off of him. And this is sort of what our research would have predicted. So while I don't want to attribute everything to jet lag, I think at least our research would suggest that it was a contributing factor.
Oh, wow. So what difference do you think they could have made? What could have they done differently to give them that advantage when they weren't at home?
Well, they could have sent Kershaw to Chicago earlier. Or even not. Yeah, basically sent him to Chicago earlier so he could adjust his clock and be ready for.
So this is fascinating. I don't know if any of the baseball coaches are watching now, but they should be, right? They should be paying attention to this.
Yeah, I think baseball teams, are aware of the jet lag issue, but I think hopefully our research adds a little bit more evidence to support making these types of changes. Okay,
so what can the average person who doesn't play baseball learn from this too? What do we need to know just as people in everyday life? What can we learn from this study?
Well, first of all, that jet lag can impact your performance in many different ways. One of the interesting results of our studies was that we also saw the jet lag effect even when players were returning home from a trip. And so I think we normally think about jet lag when we're traveling on the road, but when we get back home, we don't normally think about that as a factor in what might affect our own performance or health.
So you think then well, let's talk about the Cubs, or let's talk about the Sox too, because I love both teams. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I do. So when they're planning their schedule, spring training is coming up, that this is something that they should sit down, they should look at it, and it should be part of the plan.
Absolutely. I think what our work shows is that it's affecting performance in a very significant way.
So when you're watching these games as you're doing this study, are you going, I could have told you that was going to happen because they didn't get enough travel time in and they were suffering from jet lag?
I wouldn't quite go that far, but I definitely do pay attention to when the teams are traveling and what might be going on in a particular game, just to kind of see how it might fit in with what we're observing. Okay,
we were so happy, of course, that the Cubs, took the World Series after all this time, and they're going to go for 2. But do you think it had a big impact on the Sox last year, because a lot of people weren't too thrilled with what went on with them?
Well, we didn't look specifically at that, so I can't really address that particular question, but we do know that basically anytime a team is going to be traveling that 2 or 3 time zones, you're going to see these effects. It was a fairly significant effect.
So if there was one thing out of this study that people should remember more than anything else, or something that totally surprised you guys, what would that be?
Well, I think this finding that that you can still be impacted by jet lag even when you're at home.
Right.
When you come home, and I think what we think is going on is that when we're on the road, we're more cognizant, we have a more structured schedule, we have fewer distractions. But when you get home and you get all those requests from family and friends, particularly if you had a long trip, you're just not able to control your schedule quite as much, and so it really could affect you then.
Which also brings me to time change. Daylight saving time. That has to have the same type of effect on us, right?
Sure. It's only a 1 hour change, but definitely people have shown that particularly when we spring forward and we lose that hour, there can be effects on performance.
That is just fascinating. Thanks so much for coming in this morning, and love hearing about that. And hopefully, like I said, some of our teams are listening so they can make some adjustments.
Well, thank
Pleasure to have you. We welcome you anytime you want to come back and tell us about your latest project, okay?
Great.
Great to have you here.